Bishop Academy Books. Presenting The Children's Encyclopedia by Arthur Mee.
The wonderful house we live in and our place in the world. What this story tells us. How life came into the world no man can tell. Certainly the first living things were plants, and from these all the life we know has come. This part of our book tells us what we know of life, and how it works, and the most marvelous things it has made, the bodies we live in. Fearfully and wonderfully are we made, and perfect and beautiful beyond words is the human frame and all that moves within it. Here we shall read how it works, of the astonishing arrangements which govern our lives, of the delicate balancing of the machinery which secures the perfect working of sight, thought, speech, hearing, breathing, moving, and of the complete cooperation and sympathy existing in us all between body, mind, and soul. We shall read here also of the lives of those about us, of citizenship and our place in society and the world. Life that fills the earth. Life fills the seas, covers the dry land, and flies in the air above. Everywhere there is life, and movement, and birth, and death, and new birth. Always and everywhere there is life and more life. These are the most wonderful, interesting facts of the world we live in, and we must ask many questions concerning them. For instance, what is the difference between a living thing, like a fly, or a rose, or a child, and a thing that is not living, or that never has lived, like a stone, or the gravel, or clay in the garden? What are the different kinds of living things? How is it they are so different? An elephant is very different from a piece of moss, yet an elephant is much more like a piece of moss than like a piece of flint. Why is it? We know that living creatures die, and yet life does not die. There is no living thing on the earth now that was alive 2,000 years ago, except perhaps a few great trees like the cedars of Lebanon. All the living things that were alive then, fishes and flies and birds and flowers, are dead now, yet the earth never was so filled with life as now. Why is it? It is because of the very wonderful fact that all living things have children, and these children are like their parents, and that when the parents die, the children carry on their lives, and so the world goes round. There's an old Greek story of the runners who had to carry a flaming torch, and as one runner fell, tired out, he gave the torch to another, and so, though the runners fell and could not reach the goal, the torch was not put out, but went on burning. The torch is like the flame of life, and each living creature is like the runner, handing the flame to the children who will carry it on when he's gone. Where have all these living things come from? We know that all things, living and dead, have come from God, who sustains them from everlasting to everlasting. But how did all these kinds of living things come into existence? What is their history? Who were their parents? It is well for us that we've been born in the days when this truth and so many others are becoming known, for the more truth we know, the better it is for our lives. Let us begin by asking ourselves how we can tell whether the thing is alive or not alive. Now, that is really silly, you may say, because anyone can tell in a moment that a fly is alive and that the window pane is not alive. We know that the fly is alive, just as we know that a boy is alive because he's so lively. We call something alive that moves about itself, anything that jumps or shouts or swims or flies. We say this, but is it true? Really, it is not true. When we come to think of it, the boy is still alive even when he is asleep. He is just as alive when asleep as when he was playing. Some wise child may say this is not a good argument at all, for even when the boy is asleep, he still moves, for we can see him breathing. That is true. The heart has not gone to sleep. It is still moving. And it is moving because it is alive, so that after all, the boy is lively all the time, whether he is asleep or awake. And the real question is whether a thing which does not seem to move at all is alive like the boy. Must anything really alive be really lively like the boy? We shall see. We can imagine how a bird flying high in the air is able to look down on the surface of the earth. A bird's eye view is a view that the bird has of the world when it is up in the sky. It sees everything when it is up in the sky. It sees everything at once. Now, it is always necessary to take a bird's eye view of anything we're trying to understand. If we take nothing but short views of one thing at a time, our ideas will be as silly as a fly's idea of an elephant must be. We must see one thing at a time and all things together. We must take both sorts of views. When we do this, we see that there are two great kinds of living things, very different from each other. The difference is not in size or quantity, but in kind or quality. The one kind of living thing we call animals, the other kind plants, and they are quite different. There are many differences, but the difference we notice first when we take our bird's eye view is a difference of liveliness. Animals move about themselves, plants do not. Shall we say then plants are not alive? That has often been said and thought in the past because men thought if a thing was to be called alive, it must be lively. We know that plants are not lively like a cat. You can always find a rose bush where you left it in the garden, but the cat is not always where you left it. So men thought because plants did not walk away, they were not really alive. And then men came to see the truth of what we have already said, that after all there is something about a rose which makes it more like a fly than it is like a piece of stone, even though the fly can fly and the rose cannot. So men thought there were two kinds of life. One was real, true life, like the fly's life or tiger's or ours, and the other was a sort of half and half life, not the real thing but a feeble imitation of it. Men said that kind of half and half life was the life of trees and plants. The men who said these things did not understand much about them. They knew that there was something strange about the oak and acorn, but they could not persuade themselves that anything that was not lively was really truly alive. But men began to find out things at last. One man learnt something, the next man learnt a little more, and the man who came after him learnt a little more still, and so the world became wiser and wiser. We know that all the men who lived before us knew, and we have also learned something they did not know. As men learned about the world, they were able to get a bird's eye view, and the result of all their thinking is that we know now that plants are just as much as alive as animals. In some ways, plants are actually more alive than animals, even though they are not lively. The difference is that the life of the animal shows itself in liveliness, but the life of the plant shows itself in something else. We know the animal is alive because it's like the boy, lively, like you. Your life shows itself in your liveliness, but we know the plant is alive because it helps the animal to be live and lively. Though the plant is very quiet and still, its life is very important because it makes the liveliness of the animal possible. For the animal lives on the plant, and if there were no plants, all animals would die. Animals make a great noise, but plants do just as much work, only they do it quietly. We need not always be shouting and jumping and barking or blowing a trumpet to prove we are alive. Plants do none of these things, but their life makes all other life possible. We see now that life means more than liveliness. Many things that are not lively are really alive, but living things do not make a noise and walk about. You may look at a thing and never see it move for a day or a week or a year, yet it may be alive. Life means much more than the idea of something which moves by itself. Movement is not really life, because everything moves. Plants do not walk about the garden, but they move. When the acorn grows into an oak, it moves upward. When the sunflower faces the sun as it grows, it moves not upward but other ways. And if we take the leaf of a plant and look at it through magnifying glasses in what is called a microscope, we can see for ourselves the tiny specks of green stuff which give the leaf its color after its color are ever moving. Everything is moving, whether we see it or not, so that life is more than liveliness. The tiny specks of stuff that make up a pebble are always moving, and so are the black specks that make the ink on this page. If liveliness means life, then all things are alive, for all things are lively if seen clearly. This is important to understand if we are to think properly of the life of the plant. Perhaps movement is the most important thing in the world, and perhaps, if we could really see deeply enough, we should find that life itself is really a very special kind of movement or liveliness. But if life is just a special kind of movement, it is so very special that it makes all the difference whether a thing has this movement or not. Consider now the humble forms of life. The most simple kinds are plant life or vegetable life. Some are lively, some not, but they are all alive. If there were no plants, animals could not live. Plants are older than animals. That is to say, there were plants on the earth before there were any animals, and the first kinds of animals were the children of plants.